Hello, my name is Ildiko,
And I'm Phil.
and this is the My Open Source Experience podcast.
Open source is an incredibly social art.
Open source is innovation.
Like open source is enabling.
Open source is community.
And open source is weird.
Open source is incredibly important.
Open source is hard.
Open source is engaging.
Open source is collaboration.
Open source is like running the show.
Open source is ubiquitous.
Open source is, well, my life.
And open source is not free.
Before we dive in, let me give you some important reminders. People on the podcast participate as individuals. They do not represent any company or organization. All the thoughts and opinions are theirs. People share their stories and experiences, the way how they went through them and how they remember them, and reflect how those experiences affected their lives, influenced their decisions and their careers back then or ever since. Welcome to the My Open Source Experience podcast. This is another mid-season mix episode with topics around diversity and inclusion, as well as participating in open source. First, Phil and I are chatting with Emily Lovell about women in tech. Then we have a conversation with Nithya Ruff about diversity and inclusion, as well as attending events, both as a developer as well as a manager. And then we are talking to Onexi Medina about his first experience attending an open source conference. And last but not least, we have a segment with Jim Hall about how he's using open source tools and software for his course about tech writing. Enjoy the show.
I'm personally curious, given that both of you are proclaimed introverts and women, and in my experience, most of these open source projects, like the rest of the tech industry, is heavily overloaded with white guys like me.
Who's also an introvert.
Who's also an introvert. So how did the conversation ever spark to begin with? But seriously, I mean, what has your experience been there? And was that, again, you passed the welcoming, or because I have to expect that that's even more intimidating when you walk into that BOF and, you know, there's 23 people and you're one of the 3 women that are out of that, which statistically is what I'm expecting you walked into. So how was that? And is that something that also takes more courage to get past, to be able to say, hi, I'm here. I don't know much, but I'm interested, to a bunch of guys that are in that room. I'm curious, what were your experiences, both of you?
Yeah, I kind of got lucky in this space, like because the group of faculty who was already doing a lot of research and teaching with open source actually has several female faculty leading that. And so I think I mean, now that you mention it, I think that really did impact my experience in like a positive way. And that kind of speaks to the importance of being able to have women in these like leadership positions or faculty roles, of being able to draw in and mentor other people. So I think that part I got kind of lucky, but I will say that I do still find it really nerve-wracking and difficult sometimes, like showing up in a space that I don't see women in leadership positions, or I don't see women's voices being elevated if I'm like lurking in like a community's like chat, channels. And that I have also encountered it even with like teaching with students. Like my first term teaching open source, I had a scathing review from a male student that was really like tearing me down for the fact that I was like willing to admit to my students that I didn't have the answers to everything. I was like, I said, I don't know, if I don't know the answer to something, I would say, I don't know, but like, I'm going to figure out how to connect you with the resource, right? Like that, I think is the skill more than me having all the answers. And the student made a direct comparison to a prior male faculty member who never said, I don't know, but just like made up answers or said they knew when they weren't sure. I don't know. So that's an example of, I think, like, stuff that feels really good, and then also like some really bummer experiences that are still around. I still feel like I try to elevate other women's voices in meetings because I don't always feel heard, even in people that I really enjoy collaborating with. So it's a challenge, but Ildiko, what's your experience been like?
I have some similar and some different experiences in terms of, like, for instance, even within my own family, I'm an only child and I'm a girl. Like, it's not like just, oh, we got a boy, so the boy will run off and can do whatever he wants. It's like, oh, it's a girl. We will constantly have to worry about her till the end of everybody's life because, who knows what happens with the poor thing in this awful world. This is how I grew up. So that built some resiliency in me, like even from childhood, like, I'm a girl, but that doesn't mean that I'm not capable of figuring my things out or protecting myself for that matter. So that's what comes from my childhood. And that kind of fed into how my professional career was going, because at university, I think the computer science was together with electrical engineering. That was a department with two parts. I think there was maybe 10% women who got in total, the whole department, when we started. And I don't even know the percentage of women who actually finished. So there were not that many girls hanging out. The girls' bathroom was always empty. I was like, oh, this is great. Like, I go in, there's never a line. And I actually feel that I did get really lucky, though. I was more of a teacher's pet person, and I found other, white guys who shared the similar values in terms of, let's make sure that we finish this thing in 5 years. And, we had like this study group, and we took very similar classes where we had the choice and went to places together. We were hanging out. So they were my friends, but we were also a study group and just supported each other. So I think that experience just kind of made me realize that there are allies in this world, and it doesn't really matter if you're boy, girl, identify with a different gender. It really doesn't matter. It's just we're all human beings and we're helping each other. And that experience probably helped me to feel more comfortable if I'm hanging out with guys. And it just started not really matter in terms of me feeling intimidated or not. And the first workplace that was also not really filled with women, we had an assistant who was a woman. And then at one point, we also hired another woman. So I think eventually we hit the 10-15% there too. But my colleagues were very friendly. I knew quite a few of them from university. So that was also a similar experience. Then Ericsson, yeah, not that many girls there either in the projects where I worked. That part is almost surprising, but somehow there weren't too many women. And then the open source community, yeah, not too many women either. But at that time, I kind of, in the big corporate environment, I just realized that my ambition usually pushed me through challenges. A challenge always motivates me. And if the challenge is walking into a room with, let's say, 10 men at a leadership meeting and showing everybody that I'm the person in the room who actually knows what she's talking about, and I'm teaching everybody else, for example, about what open source is, that's okay. And that's more than okay. And I'm more than happy to do that. Both you do it for yourself because you need to feel, comfortable in those situations to be able to keep doing that. And at the same time, paving the path for other women as well. You only need a few to show the example, and then you will have others to come and do the same thing too. And all that helped me. And actually within the corporate environment, I did experience women cutting each other off and under, which was, now that one hurt. I will not lie about that. That one really did hurt. That within our own organization, 2 women and the other woman thought that this is a competition where you just can do anything to come out on top. And I'm like, we don't have to form a sisterhood and very visibly support each other, but don't screw me over behind my back. So that was a very interesting experience. And I think what's really sad in this environment is that sometimes we women feel that we have to almost destroy the other person just for us to stay afloat. And that's not good. So that experience was kind of eye-opening. On the other hand, in the open source environment, with everything that I learned, I didn't really have any more difficulties or challenges to either speak up or just deal with a male-dominated environment. In my experience in the open source community, people always listen to me more compared to a corporate environment, which is the other reason why I keep telling this to people, that I don't understand why people feel that the public open source environment is scarier than a corporate one, because I had way more bad experiences in the corporate environment behind closed doors than in any of the open source communities. And whatever experience I did have in the open source community, that is something that others saw too. So we as a group can go and address it. It was a great question, because again, it's just thinking it through, how actually the open source environment to me feels way more comfortable and safer than a corporate one. It's an interesting comparison. I don't think I ever fully thought it through my own experience.
Yeah.
I'm glad the question kind of helped you do that. In my experience, again, it's been a long 20 years, I think, for open source. There are some notoriously terse, concise, flaming would be the words that were used on how you take or how you get feedback. And I think even working in Open Daylight in the early days with the Linux Foundation, I had one group and one sub project that I had people, and I had one woman in particular who was just frustrated with the tone of conversation. It was too harsh, and they were less tolerant than guys who were also complaining, but didn't leave. But the one was like, you know what, I life is short. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to deal with this person. And I totally get that and appreciate it. And like I said, I do think that good strides across a lot of projects, codes of conduct have become standard practice, and that wasn't the case back in those days. And projects that I personally consider models, being Linux being one of them, has always been known historically as a pretty harsh environment. If you don't behave according to their standards, and that's when you're lucky enough to get a response, because if you really do things wrong, they just ignore you, which I've had many folks learn that lesson the hard way as well. But those organizations have become better. But I do think it is something that is a work in progress still. And it's something that, like I said, is somewhat hit or miss. But it's interesting that you mentioned that your experience is easier to work with folks outside a company than in. And I know for a lot of developers that I know that aren't comfortable working outside in open source, it is because it's amplified, right? It's like the difference between your classroom and social media, right? In your classroom, somebody might not think that you're great, but it's limited to those 30 people, right, that are in your classroom. But when social media or IRC, in the case, you get flamed and called out for something that wasn't the most competent move that you could have made, and then it gets amplified out, that they're afraid of that, right? That's we guys, we have thin skins. We don't know how to take criticism sometimes, so having it exposed is just that much worse for us.
This is so fascinating. Like, I will have coffee with the two of you any day for the rest of my life. Like, so much interesting things to think about. Like, Phil, it's actually very validating for me to hear your experience observing women choosing where to put their energy, in part because of tone of communication, because that resonates so deeply for me. And I think but I also don't know that many other women in open source because of what we're talking about. So it's actually interesting even to hear that through you. And I think you know, and Ildiko, like some of the things you said about like, it definitely resonates with me. Like, I find myself sometimes doing things out of like a challenge. Like if somebody's like, oh, well, I don't know if you're up to that, or like, I don't know if you're going to do that. Like, you know, it's kind of a joke with my PhD advisor that the minute he said, like, I don't know if you're going to finish, I was like, well, watch me, you know, like, and I think like that
Gauntlet thrown.
motivates
Yes.
me. Yeah, exactly. But I also, you know, think it's so important to work on how do we like make it so that that doesn't have to be how you thrive in this sort of ecosystem. And I mean, I think we're all engaged in trying to do that. And I think, you know, also to something you said, Phil, I think like having male allies and white male allies, like there's, yes, please, like so many parts of my career have been advanced by the advocacy of white men with more experience than me that I am just like super grateful for, you know, given that things are as they are. We aren't, you know, quite, you know, not quite, it makes it sound like a small thing. Yeah, we're not quite there yet. Like I think it's
No.
there's such a place for people to have like self-awareness and to pull other people up, you know, sort of anyone who's maybe doesn't have the privilege that you have within your context.
Yeah, and I think that like adding to what Phil said in terms of, you know, the responses being amplified in the public environment, at least most open source communities where I showed up, majority of the people are there because they are interested in the same technology, finding solution to the same problem, and we are all trying to work on a shared mission, and that kind of helps with setting it aside your gender, your country of origin, your religion, or any other aspects about you besides the fact that we are again trying to work on something together. And I think that that can probably be something that is feeding into my experience in terms of how it is easier for me to find my voice and communicate in open source communities versus a corporate environment, when a corporate environment is usually about, you know, a bit of a competition between colleagues. We want the same promotion maybe, or, you know, shooting for a similar position, and all the inequities in, you know, salaries and all those kind of things. Like, all that part, you don't really have that in the open source community. And the other thing is like being on IRC or well any kind of a chat tool or a mailing list. Majority of the time, people see my nickname or my email address, and they may or may not know what gender I identify with. I remember, what was that, 8 years ago, 9 years ago, I showed up at the OpenStack Design Summit because we were trying to push a feature through in one of the networking projects. And I was more of the vocal people within the company. I already built a name in that community overall. So I was doing some of the email communications. And I remember guys, not just white, but guys walking up to me and saying like, oh, you're a woman. We thought you're a guy because my first name ends with an O, and I think in one of the languages it means that you're most probably a guy. Just because they see a name that's a foreign name, you don't have a way to guess almost really anything about the other person. So it's kind of hiding in plain sight in a way that you can really just communicate about the topics that you're passionate about. And if people see your passion, your motivation, even if you don't know something, but if you do have the willingness to learn and the willingness to negotiate with people that, yeah, I want to do this, they want to do that. So what's the middle ground? And then we will find it together.
So I'd like to ask a question about inclusivity. I know this is something that is, I think, near to your heart. You know, open source, reflective of the software development ecosystem at large, is not particularly diverse. I think you've spent some time working on that. I think Ildiko has as well. Any stories that you can say there as far as things that have worked or challenges that you've had, or what can we be doing more of to improve general inclusivity?
Yeah, we have a pretty bad track record, I must admit. I think GitHub studies and then other studies have shown that we are sitting at 10% or less women in open source or underrepresented in open source. And I think what OpenStack did in the old days by having groups like Women of OpenStack, having Upstream University was so valuable to kind of making it less scary on how to get involved and that there's a support system. I remember the Women of OpenStack, the evening reception was always the day before the conference. So at least you could get to know a few friends, get to build a community, and then navigating the conference or navigating projects became easier because you knew someone. And I think those are the types of activities that Open Source Summit is also doing for newcomers lunch, or doing a one-on-one talk, or having a lunch for these communities really helps. Because being alone in a community like that is really scary. And so having like-minded people or seeing that there are others who are also navigating the same journey or learning from each other. Frankly, the way I started also, my first open source summit, I didn't know too many people. And I was nervous about, can I speak at a conference? You feel like you don't belong. And it was making friends at these types of events that taught me, it's okay, I belong too. And learning from the journeys of others really helped me understand I can start small by attending, then I can see which project I want to be involved in, or do a talk, or volunteer my time with something. So I would say, we've come a long way. We've put codes of conduct in place. We've created these friendly mechanisms to welcome new folks. But we just need to make it an institutional muscle. The scaling is the problem, right? And in open source, the inconsistency of open source, that you have a one-member project and you have a foundation-hosted large project. How do you get everyone to follow good practices of inclusion is the hard challenge. How do you reach all of them? And how do you make sure that we do it consistently across all of these projects and all of the communities is still a scaling problem.
Has either of you looked into the ratio in open source versus just the tech industry? Like if it is significantly different, or we are tracking similar numbers?
I think we're different. I would say Phil probably is similar to us. Inside companies, it's like 30% development talent, underrepresented women, and in open source, I believe it's 10. Some of it could be that people don't identify themselves as a female or binary, non-binary, etc., because of backlash or concerns. But some of it also could be the behavior is very different online as opposed to companies where we have HR and we are tracking and we have, policies and protections.
Yeah, certainly some communities have been known to be harsher. But I mean, even OpenStack as a generally friendly organization, in its heyday, it was really hard to get anybody to even respond to you. And much less with, a caring, slow, mentoring type of relationship versus a, nope, that's not going to work, try again, or something along those lines. So, there is plenty of negativity, and it is tough to persevere right through that. I think the like-minded and having those groups where people can get together as newbies, as underrepresented groups, either one, I think those are probably very helpful and something we should advocate more for.
And you often hear people joining communities, but then dropping out very shortly because there is no support for them, or they find that they're a lone voice in the woods. And even inside companies, we find that certain communities, when they find that they're just one of a kind in a team, it's a very lonely existence. So there's often talk of there should be, of course, support systems and affinity, but also you should really hire more than one person, a certain community, right? So there's at least sharing of experiences and supporting each other and normalizing, what you're thinking. Because sometimes you think, am I the only one who's thinking this way? Am I being too sensitive? And last, I'll just say the intentionality of organizations to invite different kinds of people to speak, examine closely, who's on their boards, who's on their different committees, and who's a speaker at their organization is so, so critical, because people see different faces on the stage or different faces in a room. That gives people hope that I can be there too, or I can do it too, and that someone is speaking on behalf of me or my perspective in the room.
That's a really good point.
I usually wonder about two things. One is when it comes to diversity, like even as a tech industry, if we are really around 30%, we could still do much better. And like how early in education you can start to just really share the thought in terms of you're a human being, you can do anything you want, regardless of any circumstance, including gender, religion, where you're from, and all those kind of things. And I always keep wondering if there's anything more that we could do in the open source communities, since the nature of open source and how it is done and organized, it's still different from the corporate environments. There's a little bit more flexibility and a little more outreach that we could do. So I always keep wondering what else we could do. And the other thing that I keep wondering is like those people in the minority groups who are already in the tech industry, but they are not participating in open source. Did they just not get the exposure? Did they get the wrong message from someone, or from a news headline? And how to change that? Like how to reach those people who think that they cannot do it and might have a false perception just because, I don't know, they heard a rumor somewhere. Because sometimes I understand how the public environment is scary. At the same time, sometimes I keep wondering, like, at least in the public environment, I know what to expect. I see what's happening. I have visibility into it. But when you go to a company, they either have good HR or maybe they are not. Maybe you will get harassed behind closed doors and you'll have no way out and no one ever knows about it. And you're just locked and there's no one to help you. So at the same time, like how to change the perception of the open and public environment being bad when, again, at least you see people who you will be able to turn to, you know what's happening because it is all happening in the public. So these are the things that I keep wondering about, like how we can do a better job at these aspects to move the needle.
There's one area that I think I wanted to bring up to address your question also, Ildiko, is, the 30% that we count inside companies and 10% is often just the direct developer population. We really need to expand our minds and say, what's the percentage of people in tech? Because essentially we're saying, if you're not a developer, you're not tech, right? And so if we expand it to anyone who is in any way helping in a tech company, it could be a technical program manager, it can be a technical writer. Those are very technical positions. And a product manager is a very technical position. A product marketing person is often very technical. So if we expand it, I think then we are saying we value all of these forms of tech and contribution. And B, we are saying the number is a lot larger. Hopefully that then says it's a friendly and you belong here. And there are, at least half the population in this company is underrepresented. So don't feel like you don't belong here or it's a scary place. By saying 30% and 10%, I wonder if we are putting the scare of God into people and saying, oh, if you'll just be kind of this little minority group on the side.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, even at the beginning, I think you were mentioning how open source is not just about developers, how it's not just about the super tech roles, and I could not agree more. I mean, I haven't written code for a little while now, maybe longer than a little while, but I'm still participating in communities, and I still believe I'm doing valuable work. So I wholeheartedly agree that we also need to change the perception of contributor equals to code developer, because I don't think it's ever been true. And at the same time, I still see that the perception is very strongly there. If you say contributor, then you probably mean someone who writes code. I personally do not mean the contributor word in that way, but I do experience that when I talk to people and I say the word, I think, I don't know, 90% of the time, that's what people directly associate to. And I think that is definitely something to change, because if it was only people writing code, I don't think open source would be where it is today. And that community and community building and how communities function, that's you need the other roles there and people there who don't necessarily write code at all, but there's so much more to contribute to keep something afloat. So I think that's a very important point to make.
We often shame people, we say you're not tech enough or you're not, technical. And there's a high bar to being technical. And we have developer advocates, we have so many folks who are so important in the understanding of tech and the rollout of tech to customers, but yet we brush a lot of folks with the non-technical kind of you're not good enough type of marker. Attending just one OpenStack conference or Open Infra conference or attending an open source summit just completely changes people's minds as to the keynotes, the kind of conversations that take place, the hallway track, the evening events, and how the business of open source works, right? How you nudge each other, how you collaborate with each other, what are the issues facing open source, how they impact the company. And they see their competitors showing up and speaking and doing good work, and they say, we are not here. We need to be here.
I've always loved events, even though we talked about it a lot, how most of us are introverts, and it can be a huge effort to show up and do all that mingling. But the difference between the before and after event productivity is just mind blowing most of the time, because you get home with so many new contacts and people, and you're just like, oh, I have a question and now I know who to ask, or, oh, we talked about that we are going to do this. And then once you send the email and the person remembers you usually from the social event, then it's just much easier to get progress with almost anything after that point. And I think that, at least based on my previous experience, if the manager never attended an event like that, then they will never understand why it was or could have been so valuable to their teams.
Yep. That was one of my best experiences I had at HP. Was I had several new managers to the open source group, and they were wondering why on earth these developers were going to these events. And I took them to one, and they came back so ecstatic about how incredibly powerful that was and how productive the developers clearly are because they have all these contacts and they got their questions answered. Yeah, it's huge. And that was a hallway track, right? Which is what is so valuable at these events.
Yeah, it's so funny whenever I meet someone who's new to events, I always tell them that I know that all the talks look really interesting and, a lot of exciting topics, but prioritize those where you would want to talk to the speaker, or you would want to see who's in the audience who's interested in the same topic as you are. Because if you're only there to sit at the presentation and write notes, then you practically wasted the time, the plane ticket, the hotel room, because you will get that content online. So if you don't go and don't talk to the speaker, you don't talk to other people, then you really need to think about the ROI on that event and what was your goal to go there in the first place. I see people so many times, they write the notes, they're excited about the talks, they might ask a question at the end of the presentation. And then people just walk out, and then they walk out of the conference venue. They might not go to the social event because it's just too much. It's too crowded. And then it's just, again, I question what the real goal and motivation was there and what they got out of it. And maybe they didn't get what they wanted out of it. And that is most probably why.
And the other danger is you're doing both jobs, right? You're still doing your day job and you're still attending the conference, and you're not getting any value from either. Yeah. So you just need to completely put yourself out of office and live in the moment at the conference, to your point, Ildiko, and connect with people, and then don't have to go to every single talk, every single event. Conserve your energy and make sure you're going to a few important talks and events, and don't burn out. It's so easy to occupy yourself from 7 a.m. till 10 p.m. and completely burn out.
Yes, I know. I remember the Ericsson days. A few of us developers were very fortunate because we got to go to all these events, and people who stayed home, I don't think they really understood how we were working from 6 a.m. until 10 p.m. So like sleeping was not really a thing, and it wasn't partying. Like, yes, we got a drink after the conference hours, but we were still talking about work. I was still putting my best effort into networking, which drains my energy a lot. So for me, that was like triple the efforts that went into building that business relationship at the end of the day. So like how the work days are just endless, and what it is all about. Everyone thought that we showed up at the conference, we wrote up the report about a few presentations, and then we went sightseeing. I'm like, I so wish if we could have done that. It's really not what the conference is all about, and you really have to participate to understand all those aspects of it. And all things open. I think Onexi, that was your first conference, right? At least the first open source conference.
That was my first both. Yes.
What was your experience? What was it like? What surprised you, or what did you like the most?
So I hadn't finished my degree at the time. So when I went to the conference, I didn't really know what to expect. I went initially because a program coordinator of the Catalyst program, Emily, was nice enough to kind of invite me out there, and it really encouraged me to kind of go through to the conference. I had a lot of things busy with school, but I was convinced to kind of go there. It was close by to where I was living at the time too, so I felt like it was a great opportunity to really get to see what open source means outside of what my experience was personally during the Catalyst program. So when I went there, I was surprised to see that I didn't find that many students. So I was a student at the time. I was surprised I didn't find that many people trying to study or get into open source. It was mostly a lot of people that were already there for a while, or they've heard about a lot of the stuff that's been going on. So when I was there, everything was pretty much new to me. It was like walking into Disneyland and going, "Oh my God, they have a Hulk ride," or they have this other thing. And then the other thing that really surprised me was finding out that most of the things that I use on the day-to-day has at least some piece or is all like open source. And I would have never thought that the concept of open source was so big, especially because a lot of the discussion over at the event was about how to bring more open source into corporate or getting more people into open source, kind of becoming a little bit more mainstream, which by the sheer amount of tools or code that is open source, you'd think that it's a lot bigger or a lot more mainstream, but at least the perception that I got when I was there is that there's still a lot of just common people in and outside of tech that don't really know that it exists at all. And I was surprised that I found out about it in my last year of college. So yeah, it was a lot.
And I mean, Onexi, I mean, if you go looking for it, there is literally study after study after study that fundamentally says if you look at any given piece of software today that's running any place, which pretty much everything is running some form of software, more than 80% of the code base of all of those different applications is open source. And so contemplate that number for a second. That's a staggering amount of open source that everybody relies upon. And it's this community of people that make and maintain that software. And that's how impactful it is. And you've never heard of it. So that's, where most people haven't heard of it, right? So you've got to, and this is why I'm shocked that it's not taught more as, the entire concept of how it works, why it works, and so forth. I'm very surprised that it's still not taught in university.
Yeah, I was very surprised to just find out about it, particularly because just for university purposes, I think it would be really a great way to get new people involved into communities and be able to kind of play around, get new ideas into communities, right? Because part of the thing that keeps them going is getting new people in, right? People come and go. Same thing goes for jobs. There's always a new generation of people that think differently or think of another way that project could go in the future, etc. All these things kind of come into play. And also just for learning kind of real world skills. That was one of the things that I really liked about open source, where with the skills that I had at the moment, and I could kind of send something out there and now it's actually in the real world in a sense.
People are using it. Yes.
Yeah. Most of the stuff that you do in college is just, you do it on your laptop and then you might never think about it again, or that code just doesn't get used. And then somebody else, if they just knew about it, they might find whatever you did, even if it's a speck of dust, either interesting or useful, which I think is a great idea. That, I don't know, it should be more out there. I feel like that's one of the biggest things about, say, something like Google, right? Google's a search engine. you could just Google anything, and then sometimes I could find the most small blog post that has like that one bit of information that I was looking for or trying to find out about a particular niche thing. So I think the same concept could apply to just any code. That'd be awesome. Yeah.
Yep. The long tail of uses. Yep.
Yeah, and finding out that almost everything that we use right now has some piece of open source, so that the vast majority is open source. I feel like I mentioned before, so a lot of the corporations or the things that have been built on top of this stuff is what gets like the branding or the lights, I guess, or the eyes on it, the attention. But everything else that's like the small incremental steps that it took to even get to having things like cloud games and stuff like that, nobody really talks about that. It's more like, oh, what's the face of it, or
Yep.
Yeah, that's interesting.
It is because that's how the software industry works these days, right? I mean, and like I said, pretty much everything has software, right down to your light bulb.
So you talked about having that good experience and how that encouraged you to repeat that and go contribute elsewhere too. And we talked about your professional career journey. Were you able to contribute as part of your jobs, or were there more kind of on your own free time, sort of personal-ish contributions?
Yeah. So did I ever contribute to open source as part of my day job? And no, I never did. As a after my first job, maybe I probably did some stuff there I got stuff working on a new configuration or something, and I'd send some stuff back. But I don't think I wasn't really in a position to do that. I mean, I transitioned pretty quickly into management, and so I wasn't really able to contribute to open source software as part of my job. Now, I still did a lot of open source software stuff, and so basically, on my own time and weekends or whatever, I do some evenings here and there. I'd do write open source software. I'd contribute back to open source software. What is a contribution, right? It's like, it could be, as I said, it could be like a make file. It could be something else. It could be providing a feature to another, to a program, a feature that didn't exist. It could be, writing your own project because something that doesn't exist yet. It's like different ways you can contribute to kind of the open source software, and that's kind of what I did. I did it all on my own time, because I wasn't really a developer working for a company that was doing working with open source software, and I needed to make it work with this or that. It's that because I was in IT management, IT leadership, so it wasn't just something I did. But I was at work, I was more of a user. But I will say, I teach some courses today in tech writing, and so technical writing and technical communication, and I'm teaching a class that I really enjoy teaching, which is about writing with digital technologies. It's about how to use tools and how to use technologies, and the tools that I use that I teach in that class, I try to use open source software where I can, and so for example, I teach there's technical writers still use word processors day in and day out. And we could, do Word, but we're actually not a Word campus. We're not a Microsoft campus. We're a Google campus. And so we don't have, Word that students already have. And so I actually am using LibreOffice, which I actually use all the time anyway for my consulting and for anything else that I do. And so I teach them how to do stuff in LibreOffice. I actually find is more powerful anyway, or at least the features that I use, I find it more powerful, more easy to use in LibreOffice. And so I teach that. And the students love, the feedback has been, they love, learning about how to use LibreOffice. We also learned some proprietary tools. We learned some things like that, but that are also used in the industry. But, where there's an option, it's like, open source software is a great way to go, especially for students, because it's for them, it's low cost. But I also love the kind of the exposure, right? I mean, it's like I've been in open source software since the 90s, and so I kind of like showing that open source software can do the job. One goal that I have when I do that is, the phrase that I've come to hate when people talk about open source software who haven't used open source software is they always say, well, you get what you pay for, right? And I'm like, if it's free, then it can't be good. And I'm like, no, actually, it's really good. It's really good. And so I kind of show that when, it's one of the reasons I like to show this to my students is like LibreOffice. It actually is, it's open source software. Yeah, you can download it for free. If you like it, you probably should, contribute back to the project. But, you can download it for free and use it for free. But that doesn't mean it is bad. It actually is extremely powerful. And you got these students that are just like, I love learning about LibreOffice. Scribus the same way. And of course, you also talk to people who work in the field. So technical communication, just because that's what I teach, talk to people who work in technical communication. They'll actually say they actually use open source software tools. LibreOffice is, I was surprised to learn, pretty widely used in a variety of different organizations where they need to publish this kinds of material. You need to create a workbook. You need, like a 60-page workbook for a training lab. That's a great way to do it is inside LibreOffice. You need to create a book for something. You can do that as well. It's a great way to create, basically book interiors. And so it's sort of more widely used than I thought. But it's just kind of great to show students that these are open source tools and they're very powerful. So it's kind of the other reason I wanted to kind of use that in my classes, to kind of show, it's there. Like be an advocate, right? Be an advocate basically for open source software.
Yeah, and if they also have the chance and opportunity and just understand that they can go and contribute, like fix things, make things better, then what you said about like how much you, I don't know, pay for it, and that's what you get. You can also think about it in a way that if you put your time into fixing something or making something better, then you and everyone else gets that enhancement, and that will make the tool or the project that much better. And I think that's very compelling. And with that, that's all, folks. That was our episode for today. We want to hear from you. Please leave your thoughts and feedback in the comments section of the platform where you're following the podcast. This season is full of very interesting topics. For instance, open source licenses, culture within communities as well as companies, mentorship programs, open source within companies, or in other words, why does HR have to know what free and open source software is? Stay tuned because the next episode is just around the corner.
That was my first experience.
Oh, I loved it. Y'all had me telling stories that I haven't even thought about. And
Thank you so much for having me here. It was a pleasure.
Like, I will have coffee with the two of you any day for the rest of my life. Like